So, Renato, there are so many legal walls closing in on Trump. Which one is the biggest threat to him?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I'm a former FBI agent. I teach national security law at Yale University, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. So, Asha, there were so many problems swirling around Donald Trump this past week, from the Oath Keepers' guilty verdicts to the guilty verdict for the Trump Organization to the disciplinary proceedings for Rudy Giuliani down in the District of Columbia. There have just been a whole host of problems that have surrounded him. And I'm not even going to be around for much of December. So I'm actually crossing my fingers, hoping that Jack Smith takes his sweet time and doesn't return any indictments later this month. And so I think this may be a good time for us to do a recap of where we're at with the Trump legal cases.
I agree. Sort of the end of the year, countdown of all the different cases.
It's
Um,
going to take us a full episode
ah,
to go through them all, right?
yeah, I think it will. Should we start with January 6th?
Sure. I mean, I think that's got the most attention, although I actually don't think that's the most problematic for Trump. When we saw the other day that there was grand jury subpoenas issued by the special counsel Jack Smith to various state officials in, Wisconsin, Arizona, other states, that told me he's taking that matter very seriously. He's, running down the fake elector scheme, but it doesn't suggest to me an investigation that's very far along. In contrast, the Mar-a-Lago case, which is so straightforward, we've talked about that before, where the case is much easier to prove because Trump just kept a bunch of government documents and classified documents in his residence. I think that's much closer to being charged.
I agree with you. And on well, let's quickly dispense with the Mar-a-Lago thing because I think we're in agreement that that one is more straightforward. I think we've gone, there's not much to say about that. I mean, he had classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, which he was not legally entitled to possess. They're presidential records and government records. And he illegally removed them. He did not return them when he was asked to do so. And of course, the development on that front is that the 11th Circuit basically vacated Judge Aileen Cannon's order appointing a special master, which was a big, colossal waste of time and rabbit hole that Trump was trying to go down. And so that has been dispensed with. So that allows the Department of Justice to move full speed ahead with their investigation at this point.
That's right. I mean, there are still, questions remaining. One of which is, where will they charge where will they charge this case? Will they charge it down in Florida, where there is, certainly venue? In other words, when I say the word venue, there's a requirement in the Constitution that crimes are charged where they're at. So if I commit crimes in Illinois, I can't be charged in Utah for robbing a bank in Illinois. But with something like a scheme to obstruct justice, or to even to for example, keep government property, or to willfully retain classified records, that can be done from a variety of different locations, because Trump could be planning to do that in DC and making decisions about that in DC. He could actually have the retention being done in Florida. So I think there's a real question. Will it be done? Will that indictment come in DC? Will it become in Florida? And then I think the timing is a question. In other words, prosecutors often have to think, do I wait till I have everything sewn up? I had many cases when I was a federal prosecutor where I was investigating one person for a whole variety of things. There are some people who I thought I could literally investigate them for the rest of their lives, because there's so many potential acts of wrongdoing. And at a certain point, you obviously draw a line and just charge. But do you charge some of the stuff you have first and continue to investigate the rest? I would advise Mr. Smith to do that. I would say charge the Mar-a-Lago case and then let the January 6th stuff, drag on and take its time. But it's possible he waits on that, which could obviously change the timing. I think the other question is who else will be charged, right? There's some poor guy who, well, I say poor guy, but he followed Trump's orders to move some documents. There was some questioning of that individual. There's obviously some attorneys who tried to mislead the Justice Department, FBI, which is obviously a bad idea. And there's others who could potentially be charged as part of that scheme. So very interesting decision making tree there.
Yes, and the other complicating factor here is that involved classified information. That to the extent that they choose to charge Trump with the Espionage Act, with willfully retaining classified information, the Department of Justice is going to have to make a decision on which documents they want to, basically make the issue of the case, right? And there are a lot of considerations that go into that. Part of the classified documents being returned to the Justice Department from an earlier 11th Circuit ruling allowed them to continue with the classification review. So they're kind of going through the documents, making sure they're appropriately classified, inventorying it all. But at some point, they're going to have to make a decision because you know there's always the risk when you prosecute a case like that the information that you're kind of making the issue of the case is going to end up getting disclosed. And so if it's national defense information, you need to be very careful about that. So I think that that's going to also be something underlying it. But to the point that of kind of how far along we are, I think we need to just do a basic reminder that this is all coming after a search warrant was executed at Trump's home. And search warrants are highly intrusive and come much later in an investigation. And so just that alone tells you that this had proceeded to a point. And, my sense is that kind of going that far makes an indictment more likely. That's something that's already been contemplated. Whereas if you're still at the investigative stage of questioning people, you don't know yet that they have even probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed with regard to Trump.
Yeah, very, very good points. I will just say, Asha, I've been all over the place lately saying that I think an indictment is likely, which is very out of character for me. I'm usually like the sad panda who's like, no, 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 nothing's going to happen. I've changed my tune as to this particular charge for a number of reasons, but which I think we've already discussed on the podcast. But I think that if there isn't a charge here, it's going to be because of something that is called gray mail, and that's really what you're touching on. And as you mentioned, that in the United States of America, you are entitled to receive the evidence that is being used against you in a case. So, the government can't say, "Hey, we've got some amazing evidence that's going to prove your guilt, Renato, but we're not going to provide it to you. You're just going to have to take our word for it, or you can't examine this before trial yourself, and you and your attorneys can't prepare for it." The practical matter is that there is actually a statutory system in place that even for classified information, that the defense has some opportunity to review those documents, that evidence, and use that at trial. And so what I think one issue for the Justice Department is, Trump seems like the sort of person who is not only vindictive and hateful towards the Justice Department and the federal government and contemptuous, but he's somebody who just doesn't give an F, so to speak. And so he, I think, would not think twice about posting all of the classified information on Truth Social. And I wonder, if there isn't an indictment here, because I've tried to think of myself, why wouldn't you indict in this case? And really, to me, it comes down to one of two things. Either one, it's Trump and just the Justice Department's like, we're going to look political if we indict Trump, so we're just not going to do it, which I think would be a horrible policy. And I don't think they're going in that direction. The second might be some national security analysts, people more like you, in a room saying, "Oh my goodness, if we indict him on this stuff, he's going to be spilling all of our secrets about how we learn about the nuclear weapons capabilities of all these countries," or something
Yeah.
like that.
I would say though, Renato, that that's a threat now. I mean, like theoretically, he could do that if you indict him with anything.
I think that's right.
Right? Like he doesn't have the document. You're talking about stuff that's in his head right now. And if he really wanted to start just doing like a big truth social thread of like our national defense secrets, I mean, he could do that with regard to the Fulton County case. I mean, he could do that if that's the leverage. And I think that that would be very wrong to use that as a basis to not move forward. And I also think the optics at this point, they're kind of beyond that. I mean, I think because I think you can make the argument that the optics also look really bad if you executed a search warrant and went through all the stuff and then are like, okay, thanks, we're just going to keep this. Goodbye. Um, so, but should we move on to the January
Y-
6th case too? I feel like we can now talk about this case
Yeah, pretty
for an
much.
hour.
So yes, so let's talk about January 6th. I mean, when we say the word January 6th, right, we're talking about a whole host of things all at the same time.
We're talking about multiple different conspiracies that were interconnected and, uh, you know, culminated in the events that day. I have a diagram, a coup chart, which I had posted on my Twitter feed for a while, which I think, um, highlighted all of the different components of the January 6th scheme.
It's a scientific diagram, without a
Exactly,
doubt.
very, very highly. So let's just run down the possible, like the potential, and we're talking about Trump here, right? Like Trump's liability, and I think maybe just quickly do a rundown of the different charges in play. Um, you mentioned the Oath Keepers. Stuart Rhodes was convicted of seditious conspiracy a couple weeks ago or a week ago. I can't remember. Time is blurring together. Um, and Renata, you know that I've been the sad panda on seditious conspiracy for Trump. I just don't think like never say never, and I don't know what evidence they've gathered, but there's not a lot of case law with regard to seditious conspiracy. It's not, there's not a lot of precedent because you don't want to charge it a lot. It's a highly symbolic charge. It's a political crime. It creates a lot of stigma. It's as close as you can get to charging someone with treason. So, and it's hard to prove. Um, and the case law that is there is a very high bar. It requires showing that the person had a specific plan to use force to resist the authority of the United States. And I think intuitively people hear that and they say, well, that's obviously what Trump did, but it's not like unless you, I think, had a situation where he was communicating with Stuart Rhodes and was like, "And here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna march to the Capitol." Um, I think that it will be a much more circumstantial and tenuous connection that the Justice Department wouldn't charge. Now, look, if on that day Trump had managed to convince the Secret Service to let him go to the Capitol and be there as these people were rioting and leading the charge, I guess, in there, maybe things would have been different, right? But I think what we know now and what he did, which was he was not present at the scene. I have not seen any direct connection between him and these militia groups that have been charged and now convicted of seditious conspiracy. So that's my take on that. I don't think that that is really in play.
Yeah, I don't think that's in play at all. Yeah, and I sorry for all the listeners who think it is. I just also just have not really seen much evidence connecting the higher ups, Trump and his very close associates with these people on the ground who were.
Well, with the exception of Roger Stone.
Yeah, I think that's fair point. And who knows what Roger Stone was telling the former president? But
Yeah.
I don't know. We haven't seen the evidence yet. So to me, that's just like not even in the cards. I mean, when I look at the what potential charges there are around Trump, I'm thinking about things that we actually know he was like involved in based upon evidence that's out there, right? So, okay, you have like, if I'm thinking about it, okay, certainly he was giving a speech to all these loons on the whatever the ellipse or wherever where he was basically cheering them on and urging them essentially to you know, take action, and he was using all sorts of euphemisms to basically encourage them to attack the Capitol. I think that, you know, you could bring an incitement to insurrection or incitement to violence charge there based on the fact that, you know, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, he was told that there's these folks in the crowd who had weapons, and his response was like, well, they're not going to use them against me. They're going to march on the Capitol, which I think is really something. But I just wonder. I mean, if you're Jack Smith, do you take on a like highly problematic, questionable charge like that when you could just charge a documents case and be done with it? Like I was say, it reminds me when I was a federal prosecutor and we'd have these really awful gang leaders who are ordering all these murders, and it's like, well, do we want to bring some big RICO case involving a bunch of murders we have to prove up, or do we just want to get them with like 20 kilos of heroin or something and then just charge that because it's a lot easier to prove, and then we'll show the judge all this stuff about the murders, and the judge can make whatever decision that she wants to make. And I think that's what I see here.
So I think the tightrope that Jack Smith is walking is, on the one hand, if you swing at the king, you best not miss, right? So you want the kind of the easiest case that you can get and the one that you can sew up. On the other hand, I think that when you're charging the president of the United States, especially for something like the violence that occurred on January 6th, an attack on the Capitol, I think you also want to charge conduct that fits the crime.
Hmm.
And I do think that, especially since I think seditious conspiracy is off the table, holding him responsible for the violence in some way is important. And I would have said at an earlier stage that rebellion and insurrection, which I think is what you're talking about, inciting people to set on foot and resist the authority of the United States, is also a high bar. It involves free speech issues, but as you noted, we now have a lot of evidence, at least in the public sphere, of his intent leading up to it, that he anticipated the violence, that he wanted the violence, the uh, information that he wanted to join them afterwards. And now, by the way, we have, his latest video basically providing comfort and support to the January 6th defendants. And then his tweet saying that he wants to suspend the Constitution. I mean, there's now like kind of a much, I think, more robust body of evidence about his intent and what he really wanted to transpire that day, that I think it is a conceivable charge. I don't know that it's, I don't know. I don't want to say it's likely or unlikely, but I think it's like in play. And what's important about that charge, by the way, Renato, is that it has as its penalty a prohibition from holding public office ever again.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Although I think, given the legal challenges, and I'll just very briefly say that this is, the reason we talked. You mentioned free speech. Generally, giving political talks in the ellipse, particularly for a public figure, the president of the United States, is protected by the First Amendment. So it's a very thorny issue as to whether or not this is something that could be prosecuted, or whether his speech was First Amendment protected. I just think that realistically, any case, any trial would certainly come after the next election, because there would be a very long Supreme Court challenge that would occur in the beginning. I do think, this is something that could conceivably be taken on. It's something that I think Jack Smith would have to feel very strongly about, and or Merrick Garland would have to feel very strongly about, that they want to bring this case. It reminds me when we had threat cases against judges, for where people were there. We had, I remember in my former office, we had radio hosts who was trying to get people to kill, conservative radio hosts was trying to get people to kill federal judges, and we brought that case multiple times and had multiple acquittals and all sorts of First Amendment challenges. And obviously, we felt strongly about it because, hey, these are the judges that were considering our cases, so we wanted to make sure they were alive, and we felt very strongly about protecting them. But I think this would have to be something that they were committed to, because it's going to take a lot of resources just to get that case brought and get it to trial, given the legal hurdles. So, Asha, now let's talk a little bit about the wild cards, because there are definitely some legal cases that people don't talk much, and I think we really don't know where they're going to go. And one of those, to me, is this whole Clark and Eastman thing. Jeffrey Clark was proposing that the Justice Department send a letter to the state of Georgia containing a bunch of lies, trying to convince them that they shouldn't certify their electors because there's like a lot of questions about or whatever. All of which he wasn't authorized to say and wasn't true, and he was told by his superiors are false. That strikes me as like an absolute like 100% strong false statement case. So 1001, in other words, you're making a false statement in a federal proceeding against Clark. Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that Donald Trump really wanted that statement to go out and almost made Clark the attorney general, right? So, what's his liability there? Who knows? Like, that's like a total wild card. Another wild card is this fake elector scheme. That's what that grand jury subpoena we talked about earlier was about. Well, fake electors, those appear to be false documents that were going to be filed with the United States Senate. Also, an obvious problem because those people weren't the valid electors for those states. Who's implicated in that? How high does that go? There's a lot of really salty emails out there where Republican attorneys are like, yeah, this seems like a fraud or false or something. Where's that going to go? I think we don't know yet. It's really early on.
Yeah, and just to make sure that people understand the connection, I do think the DOJ letters are connected to the fake electors scheme, and I think this is related to the subpoenas that went out to these officials. The idea was because Jeffrey Clark intended to send a copy of that letter not just to Georgia, but also the 6 other states where the slate of fake electors were being created. And I think the idea was to create a legal veneer that this was all based in actual substantiated allegations of voter fraud, which would then justify like creating the second slate and da, da, da. Like it was all, I think it was just all one big plot. But as you said, how does this tie back to Trump? In terms of the states, don't forget that Trump's dream team, Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and Jenna Ellis, were the ones who were making the rounds in each of these states, talking to the legislators, egging on these claims of voter fraud, etc. So, that's not just Jeffrey Clark, but that's another conduit through which, Trump may have been involved. But as you said, I don't know how tight that connection is. Trump is a very savvy guy. We know this, that he talks in code and he understands how to keep himself at arm's length from his, you know, minions who are out doing his dirty work. So I think it's definitely challenging, and you would need, I would think, um, testimony from these people to say and to say this is what we were discussing and this is exactly what Trump asked me to do or what he knew, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's all pretty far afield. And by the way, it really goes to show. I mean, we're talking about various January 6 charges here. This is all much more tenuous and kind of further afield than certainly Mar-a-Lago, which we talked about earlier, but just a lot of other things that we're going to talk about in this episode. And it's interesting because January 6th, obviously a horrific day in American history, a day that's going to be remembered. I think Trump bears a lot of moral responsibility for it, but there's really, I think, a difference between bearing moral responsibility for something that's heinous and whether or not there's sufficient evidence to charge a federal crime, because there aren't a lot of federal crimes around, trying to block the peaceful transfer of power and some of these things that, frankly, don't happen every day.
Yeah, and I think that highlights, that's such a great point, Renato. It highlights the importance of the process of impeachment because our criminal code isn't designed to describe behavior, as you just noted, by a person who holds the vast powers and authority of the presidency of the United States. Like, that's not, the criminal code is designed for like your average Joe. And so often when we're looking at the criminal code to fit the behavior that Trump engaged in as president, you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And the impeachment process, which is much broader, or the bar for impeachment, high crimes and misdemeanors, offers essentially an escape valve so that you're not, in these very tight rules and definitions that the criminal code offers. And I think, unfortunately, that we missed that boat twice. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's an understatement. All right, well let's come back in a minute and talk about everything else. There's like a whole potpourri of federal and state.
Should we go to the New York bundle? I
The New
like
York bundle. We'll go to that in just 1 minute. So, Asha, we had, I think, a pretty important verdict this past week. The Trump organization is found guilty by a jury of engaging in fraud, tax fraud. I think a very significant verdict. What I find, one thing I find interesting about it, although there are certainly lots of there has been a lot of attention around the world. I've been getting, I'm sure you as well, inquiries from various news organizations wanting to talk about it. Um, it doesn't have as much direct significance as you might think, because of course these are convictions of entities. It's not even, we call it the Trump organization, but there's really a whole slew of different companies that are part of it, and these are just two specific companies that had this verdict. And you can't throw companies in jail, so it's not like they're going, the company is in shackles somewhere in the prison. It's realistically got a fine, and it'll have some consequences, but it's not, doesn't quite have the impact that an indictment of let's say Donald Trump might have.
that's true, but I wouldn't underplay the importance of it because it does hit Trump where it hurts, right? Um, I mean, Trump cares about 2 things. He cares about public image, and he cares about money. And so, I guess I would be interested to know what you think in terms of the fine. Like, will it be enough to hurt or make any kind of meaningful dent in his business empire? And then I think we mentioned before the break the bundle. So there's the sister case, the civil case by the New York AG. And this is looking at the valuation scheme of Trump's assets. Is that right? Yeah,
Yeah.
looking at
So
he
yeah,
overvalued
that's right.
them for purposes of getting loans, he undervalued them for purposes of his taxes, and that's again, still a civil case, which I assume has the potential to become a criminal case if depending on what they find, and even if not, isn't there potential significant liability there too in the form of fines? We know that, for example, the Trump Foundation had previously been investigated and then ultimately was dissolved because of financial mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. So, I'm just saying, I know, look, we all want to see him in an orange jumpsuit, but I think we shouldn't discount how these other mechanisms can be important and can uh I think we can trump in significant ways and hit him where it hurts.
I'm gonna make a provocative comment here. So usually we think that criminal cases are more serious than civil cases. In this particular context, I actually think the civil case is a bigger problem and has more serious downside for Trump and for his companies than this criminal case. So to be a go back to my usual sad panda persona. I don't really think the criminal case in and of itself generates a lot of problems for Trump. I think the fine's gonna be like 1.6 million, something along those lines. There's a couple entities that were convicted here, that, Trump Corporation, for example, a lot of companies, one thing that folks may not realize is that, if you have a big company, whatever, pick your favorite company, that, we may think of it as one company, Apple, Twitter, McDonald's, whatever your favorite company is. There are actually a whole slew of different entities that do different things. There's like a payroll company, there's a company that just holds the IP, all these different entities. So these are a couple entities that are part of the Trump organization. They have this criminal penalty. But here's the thing: in the civil case, she's not just asking for fines. She wants like the Trump, basically these entities to lose their license effectively under New York law to be able to operate in New York. She wants to say that Trump cannot own commercial real estate, cannot purchase commercial real estate in New York any longer. enter into certain types of contracts. She wants to have all sorts of oversight over the Trump organization going forward. I mean, just massive penalties that would effectively cripple the Trump organization and make it so that they couldn't effectively do business in the state of New York
That's
going
his
forward.
livelihood. I mean, and
Right.
that's, you know, this is a little bit tangential, but when you were talking, it reminded me of Tanya Harding after the attempt to cripple Nancy Kerrigan. I'm dating myself now, but
Hmm.
and in the prosecution, or not the in the civil suit that resulted from that case, she was ordered to that she could never skate again, and she lost her
Hmm.
livelihood, and I think, and this is all I know this all from watching a documentary about Tanya Harding, which I was obsessed with for a little
Wait.
while. But it drove home like that is a huge blow to someone when you take away what it is that has made them up. And to the earlier point that he cares about money and he cares about his image, um, this whole thing about blowing open that he's really not as rich as he is, and he's making this all up as he goes along, in terms of valuation and things like that. It's also a public image disaster for him.
It is. And here's an interesting thing. I really think that there could be an interplay between these two cases we just talked about, because the fact that these entities are already have been convicted of committing fraud, I think will potentially come in the civil proceeding. It'll
Mm.
be interesting to see there. I'm sure there'll be a battle over that. So yeah, I definitely think that's a problem for Trump, in a different way than some of these other things. But I actually think that's going to be a pretty significant problem. I also will just say that Trump, because we're all talking here today about how all he's facing all these different problems. That's not entirely unusual. So I've at times represented clients who have all sorts of problems at different venues. A lot of the other people we've talked about on the podcast, whether it's Sam Bankman-Fried or whomever, they all have problems in different jurisdictions. You sometimes have to, because give up certain, if you're fighting a multi-front war, you give up on certain fronts in order to stand strong in other fronts. And I think for Trump, realistically, they took the fifth, for example, in that civil case, because they had to, because they're facing criminal cases elsewhere. Well, the bottom line is, I think that's going to make the civil case very strong. So I do think that is a very significant problem for Trump, and more significant in a lot of ways, in my view, than the Georgia Fulton County case, which is, I think, another state case that's got to be high up on the radar if you're in the Trump team.
Yeah, before we go to that, can we look at one more thread in the bundle?
Oh, sure. In the New York bundle. Wait, there's another thread.
There's a slight thread which is reporting that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, is potentially reopening or gonna dig a little bit deeper on flashback, the Stormy Daniels payment
Hmm.
from many, many years ago that we thought was dead in the water. But this was the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels via Michael Cohen before Trump ran for president, the hush money payment, essentially, that Michael Cohen was convicted on, um, and as an illegal campaign contribution. And then the question was whether Trump would also be swept in because he testified that he had done that at Trump's direction.
All right, I'm going to be a little provocative here again. I
Be
have no
provocative.
I have no faith at all in Alvin Bragg. Okay, and here's the deal with Mr. Bragg. Mr. Bragg inherited a case that Cy Vance and his team had put together to go after not the not only the Trump organization but Trump. I have lots of friends in and around the Manhattan DA office, and everybody was telling me, like, they're all very upset. Apparently, this was not going forward. Bragg killed the case. They thought it was a great case. And I got to tell you, my initial reaction, because I'm the sad panda of the Trump world, I was like, well, you know what? Good for him for being brave, for being careful. Maybe he just thought it wasn't a winner. Like, I'm never going to criticize a prosecutor who shows restraint. I'm like, okay, wow, really a bold take. Then, when that happens, of course, everybody in the world is mad at Alvin Bragg because he kills a case against Trump and shuts it down. So what? And he did. I guess he didn't anticipate this. I actually figured. I thought at the time it was this brave decision. The guy was, didn't care about losing his job because he's an elected official. Was willing to take an unpopular stance. Well, no, the guy goes and deceives everybody into trying, just making this false suggestion that, oh, yeah, no, we still have the case open, even though everybody I talked to is like, yeah, no, the case is totally winding down. There's almost no one on it. They're just getting rid of the, case and returning all the evidence. And he's trying to make it sound like, oh, no, we're still going at him. And
But didn't
so
he hire somebody just now?
well, just now, yeah. So now this was on the prior case, right? That he killed.
Okay, yeah.
So he gave this false impression to the press, like, oh no, it's still going. I haven't made a final decision. I've just made we're not doing anything yet. We're just, we're still looking at evidence. But he gave that impression to the press while at the same time, like internally, all that I heard is that everything was winding down. So now suddenly, okay, now he wants to resurrect this Stormy Daniels thing and he's going to launch this. It strikes me as like a guy who didn't realize that making the decision he did in the prior Trump case was going to look so bad. So he wants to seem like he's still doing something and he's tough. I'll believe it when I see it. That was a challenging case for a number of reasons. It just strikes me as potentially a political move on his part.
Yeah, that was my question, in terms of, like, what's new? I mean, it doesn't seem like anything new has been discovered or unearthed that would make it suddenly a, more prosecutable case than it was before, unless I just missed something big, or unless it was something about this, conviction, trial and conviction of the Trump organization. But to me, those seem like completely unrelated issues. I mean, the Trump organization case was really about the two sets of books. Basically, there was two sets of accounting that they were doing to kind of essentially avoid paying taxes. What that would have to do with Stormy Daniels, I I can't see any connection. So I don't know what else would make this suddenly a new case.
Yeah, there may be some false entry in the books and records as a result of the Stormy Daniels payment, but why he's going at this now just smacks to me as somebody who needs to change the narrative around him because he's, I think, developed a narrative amongst a lot of people and a lot of his constituents as somebody who's not going to be tough on Trump. Like I said, my initial instinct was to admire it, but at this stage, I don't have admiration for people who deceive the public, and I'm very um, concerned about what he's doing here with this new one. So let's go. Speaking of questionable prosecutions, let's go to Fulton County.
Oh, you have been the sad panda on Fulton County.
I have. I'm very skeptical of that one as well. I'm not. I have to say I don't know. I don't have as many secret sources there, so it's not like I've got a bunch of Fulton County prosecutors who are whispering in my ear on that one. But I'm skeptical that you're going to have a state fraud case brought by a local prosecutor that's going to take down Donald Trump. We'll see. But I handle state court cases. In fact, I'm going to be handling a state court criminal case today. I'm going to be in, court dealing with that. I just, it's they don't have they have a lot on their plate. They don't have a lot of resources, and it strikes me as a complicated case. Really, that its core is about some phone calls that were deliberately ambiguous because, as you said, the people involved are good at hiding stuff. And I appreciate that everyone on Twitter or on certain television networks might pull out a few words that Trump said about find me these votes. But if you look at the whole context of it, it's kind of a word salad, which is usually what Trump does deliberately, I think, to try to confuse matters. So I'm skeptical of that one.
And I appreciate that, and I've listened to your thoughts on it, since it started. Though I think it's evolved a lot, and I would push back just in this sense. As I mentioned before, I think I agree with you that if it was just a phone call standing alone, that that's, again, it's intuitive that he's up to no good and it's sketchy, and obviously he was trying to, like, pull a scam. But it's not necessarily something that would be provable as a crime in court. But I think when you start to build out the other things that um, uh, the the prosecutor, the DA there is looking at, she's also looking at the attempt to get legislators to create a false slate of electors, or the Giuliani and Jenna Ellis talking, testifying to the Senate committees down there. And again, you have the fake DOJ letter that was coming that we know Trump was involved with. So I think to look at the call in the context of these other components, and she's bringing in these other witnesses to testify in front of the grand jury. Rudy Giuliani's come in there, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Lindsey Graham, um, so to the extent that people can flesh out what was happening behind the scenes, what was the intention, what was the bigger scheme that was in play and was being planned. I don't know that that's necessarily, it is complicated, but it sounds like that's what she's trying to do. And, it may be that once we see the story, that phone call, may be a bad act that could be prosecuted in this larger scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something now you don't usually hear legal analysts say, but I'll say this. I do think that at the end of the day, this is going to turn on questions of Georgia law that are not in my
Yeah.
wheelhouse. So ultimately, the end of the day, I'm agnostic as to how it turns out. I'm giving you my educated take of here's how I'd read the tea leaves. If I was a client called me asking for advice about a case like this is what I would express skepticism and so forth. I will say some of the people who I've talked to who do seem to know more about it are equally skeptical. So we'll see what happens. But I think that it's certainly going to create problems for Trump, and the problems that it creates are like some of the ones that I alluded to earlier. It gives him another front to fight in. So one thing that people I think don't think about enough is certainly there's a substantial cost that comes with defending yourself in criminal investigations. That goes without saying. But also, there's just an attention and time that goes. I mean, this creates something else that you have to manage and you have to plot for. So I think there's a very good chance that while Jack Smith is getting further down the road and doing whatever he's going to do in Mar-a-Lago, which I frankly expect to be likely a criminal indictment, Trump is, having to deal with court appearances in Fulton County and evidence in Fulton County and all the fallout of the charges there, while at the same time dealing with the bundle that, as you call it, in New York. And it's just a lot, and it also means that you can potentially give um, uh, prosecutors in a different jurisdiction some help. For example, to give you a sense of somebody else who's had a lot of problems, R. Kelly's been indicted all over the place for sexually abusing young children, and his testimony in one case or conviction in one case would help the
Mhm.
prosecutors in some totally separate jurisdiction. So I just think getting everyone under oath in this Fulton County case is not a good thing for Trump and his team because it just could be used elsewhere by Jack Smith or somebody else.
But think of all the grifting opportunities it offers.
Indeed, indeed. And I should say too, I do think that there's potentially other things out there that we haven't even talked about because we're getting close to wrapping up on all of this, but I will just say that there's like a whole campaign investigation, federal campaign
Mm,
investigation of his
mhm.
campaign. So there's a lot going on. And stay tuned because unless Trump is indicted while I'm on vacation, we'll have a lot to talk about regarding these subjects in 2023. So before we go, Asha, I've alluded a couple times I'm going to be on vacation, so I'll be here next week. But then I'm taking a couple weeks off at the end of the year because judges don't like to have court appearances in late December, and the as you know, FBI agents are usually off with their families in December. There's a lot of use or lose vacation time. So in my day job, I actually get to take some time and take a vacation to Europe with my wife. I think you've taken some vacations this year too, right?
Yeah, so I went to Cozumel, Mexico over
Whoa.
this summer with my kids. We celebrated my dad's 80th birthday there with the extended family. So that was great. Fun water vacation of scuba diving and snorkeling and swimming and things like that, all the things my dad loves. So, and I'll be going back to Cozumel actually in January with my boyfriend.
Wow, that I think that seems like an even better time to be in Cozumel.
Yeah,
At least speaking as a Chicagoan, like getting out of Chicago in the winter is always a good thing, and Cozumel seems like
definitely.
a perfect place to be.
Yes. And otherwise, I haven't, I haven't done a lot of international travel, and but I want to do some, and I'm hoping to get to Europe next summer, maybe.
We have not done international travel at all since the pandemic, so this is going to be a new one. I'm going to be wearing my N95 mask on the plane, hoping that that I don't get sick and ruin my trip. Right.
Where are you going?
So we're flying to Amsterdam, and
Ooh,
then we're doing a river cruise down the Rhine
ooh.
through Germany, France, and Switzerland,
Oh my
and then
gosh.
we're gonna take a train to Milan and spend a couple days there before we come back. My wife is Jewish, but she absolutely loves Christmas and is like super into Christmas. And so we always do all sorts of Christmas stuff. That's actually something when we were dating, we spent a lot of time doing Christmas stuff. So we're going to go to all these Christmas markets and have a lot of fun. It's like a very us sort of thing to do. So I'm
Yeah,
going to be bundled up, going to a lot of Christmas markets eating bad food and getting a bunch of knickknacks
yeah.
from Europe. So it
That's
should be a
great.
lot of fun.
And by the way, my hot tip, pro tip for listeners is to go into your airline apps and check your wallet, because I discovered credits that I didn't know I
Ooh.
had, and certificates that were expiring in 20, like in January 23. So just check them, because and I've told two friends to check them, and they were like, "Oh my god, I had like a $300 credit that I need to use by," so they might be there. That's all I'm saying.
This is like a steam map. Like you're basically like the self-help
I am.
person on this
I
podcast. Like
am.
you've got tips.
I do have tips. I do have tips and deals. I do. Yeah.
Wow. Well, this is exciting. My only hope, by the way, for my trip is that Henry, my dog, does not think we've abandoned him. Like
Mm.
we've got different. My stepdaughter and mother-in-law are going to be watching it for the first part of the trip, and we're just hoping that he doesn't freak out when we're gone.
Aw, that makes me
It's
sad. He'll be okay. It reminds me of, remember that when Ted Cruz fled to Cancun and there was
Oh
the
yeah.
picture of his dog, like
Oh.
in the doorway, like staring outside? That was really sad. I don't think that will be Henry. I'm sorry, but
I
I'm just
hope not. I do feel very responsible because he had been in different homes as he's a rescue, and he had been in multiple fosters and rescues. He's been in two different rescues and three different fosters before he came to us. So he's like still in the mindset that he's like not sure if I'm
Oh
leaving.
no, he doesn't know that this is his forever home.
I think he's starting to figure it out, but like every morning he gets up and comes to my side of the bed to check if I'm still there. Like, every time I come home, he's, like, so excited, like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
you actually returned," like, it's, like, a big deal,
Yeah.
and you could just tell he's, like, overwhelmed,
Yeah.
by that, so hopefully he can survive being gone a week and not think we've abandoned him.
Oh, poor thing. I think he'll be okay.
Fingers crossed. So, well, alright, we'll be back next week, and then we could talk about all the fun stuff you're gonna do when I'm gone. Please don't break anything.
Yep, I won't. I'll try not. It'll be like a risky business, party.
Wow.
uh,
Alright, on that note,
yeah, check us out on YouTube, and also these other places.
other than YouTube, well, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, yada, yada, yada.